But the Japanese did not have a means of retreat either. Oshino Takakimi recalled later, on August the 21st, the defending force in Tangchong had only 600 or so men left. Of those, 100 were seriously wounded. We had run out of ammunition and food, and the enemy was still shelling at us. Our commander sent a telegram to the division commander telling him that the city was tightly encircled, that he couldn't stand to see his men being killed one by one, and that he begged to be allowed to break the encirclement and fight outside the city. But the division commander ordered him to fight to the last. This telegram was not recorded in the history of the war. On August the 30th, the 166th Division of the 53rd Army charged into the city from the east. They were stopped near a giant bell in Wenchang Palace. But then Japanese reinforcements arrived, and Japanese planes dropped food and other supplies. Oshimu Takakimi recalled, in the morning of September the 1st, the Chinese army charged in. We had run out of bullets and had little food for breakfast. We didn't have the strength to fight. Our planes came to drop ammunition, food and medicine. But at the same time, American planes flew toward Tangchong from another direction. The American fighter planes had been waiting for the appearance of the Japanese planes. They shot several of the Japanese planes down. Oshimu Takakimi received the last supplies from his army. He recalled, our pilots airdropped the supplies at the risk of being killed. Every one of us received 1 grenade and 10 rifle bullets. This was the last batch of ammunition our troops in Tangchong received. The Japanese had just a few hundred men left in Tangchong. They fought like cornered animals. The fighting between the Chinese army and Japanese army taking place on the China-Burma border was quite different. The Chinese-American joint forces under the command of General Joseph Stilwell had driven the Japanese 18th Division back to Mandalay. General Stilwell asked Wei Lihuang to mount offensives in northern Burma with his Chinese expeditionary force, but the two groups under Wei Lihuang's command refused to move. By this time, Chinese troops under the command of Huo Kuei-jang and Song Shilian had been fighting at Mount Songshan for 3 months, and they had suffered several thousand casualties. But even so, they still hadn't taken the Japanese stronghold. On September the 9th, Huo Kuei-jung learned that Chiang Kai-shek had given Wei Li Huang a strict order. You must retake Tangchong before September the 18th, the Memorial Day of the national humiliation. Chiang Kai-shek was under pressure from President Roosevelt and General Stilwell, both of whom had urged him repeatedly to wipe out the Japanese in western Yunnan province and march into Burma. Huo Kuei-jung ordered his troops to annihilate the Japanese within 5 days. If they failed, all the division commanders would be held responsible. Oshimu Takakimi realized he would soon die, and he was scared. On September the 10th, the Chinese army, under direct orders from Chiang Kai-shek, who was greatly angered by the situation, mounted the last mass offensive. Oshimu Takakimi recalled, "Only about 350 Japanese soldiers were putting up the defense. The Chinese army didn't take us seriously. They charged over like angry wolves. The fighting went on amidst angry cries and curses. The hand-to-hand fighting turned the city into a bloody wilderness. The Chinese army suffered heavy losses. They dragged my dead and wounded comrades in arms to the front line in a psychological scare tactic. To some degree, their action dampened our fighting spirit." In the 4 days from September the 9th to the 12th, 128 officers and 1,132 soldiers of the Chinese Expeditionary Force were killed or wounded. Among them were many platoon commanders. Regiment and battalion commanders had to lead the charges themselves. Pan Shijung, a reporter with the newspaper Mopping Up, witnessed an extraordinary scene on the battlefield. He wrote, "After our soldiers climbed up the city wall at the southern gate, they saw women in 2s or 3s and in colourful clothes walking in the side streets. Most of them were Japanese prostitutes serving the Japanese soldiers. They ate the same 2 rice balls or pack of biscuits every day, the same as the Japanese soldiers did. They wore steel helmets and they helped their soldiers carry ammunition. Some of them even shot at the Chinese soldiers with machine guns and pistols." But their defeat was impending, and the Japanese prepared to break the encirclement. Oshimu Takakimi recalled, "Our division commander ordered us to fight until October, but no one wanted to die in a place they couldn't defend. On September the 13th, Senior Captain Ota sent his last telegram to the division commander. He said he couldn't suffer the pain under the heavy shelling of the enemy any longer. He begged the division commander to understand how the men under him felt. Then he ordered his soldiers to charge out of the city to wage guerrilla battles outside the city. Before he retreated, he killed all the seriously wounded soldiers, as well as the comfort women." Reporter Pan Shijung with the newspaper Mopping Up wrote about the end the prostitutes met with in these words. "A Chinese girl about 10 years old helped the Japanese prostitutes carry water. She said, 'We were hiding in an air raid shelter. A Japanese officer came in and shot all the 13 Japanese prostitutes. She fainted at the scene and survived.'" Using exaggerated language, Oshimu Takakimi talked about the end of the Japanese soldiers in Tangchong. On the morning of September the 14th, the 3,000 or so Japanese defenders of Tangchong swore to die as gloriously as breaking jade. They perished like candlelights being extinguished. His words, however, were far from accurate. The Japanese soldiers did not counterattack in a suicide charge. Deng Duo, commander of the 594th Regiment of the Expeditionary Force, wrote, "The remaining force of the enemy was forced to a place within a radius of 200 meters. Our men shouted to them, 'Put down your arms and surrender. You won't be killed.' the Japanese raised a white flag and put up no resistance. At 10 o'clock in the morning of September the 14th, 1944, 1 week after Mount Songshan was taken, the Japanese in Tangchong were wiped out. The Japanese had occupied Tangchong for 2 years, 4 months and 4 days. In this battle, the 20th Corps of the Chinese Expeditionary Force lost 8,671 men. 1,234 of them were officers. The loss was extremely heavy.
腾冲作战是中国军队8年抗战当中打得最漂亮的战斗，到最后是2000多日军当中没有一个在战争时期逃回日本阵营的，就是全部被打死或者是被俘。那么这一次战斗可以说是叫做无一漏网，全歼。这个你不要说是在中国战场，在世界战场都是极为罕见的。
It was the first time the Chinese army had mounted a mass frontal offensive against the Japanese army on its own accord in the 8 years of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, and it had won. The Chinese army won 2 battles to commemorate the 13th anniversary of the September the 18th incident, the day that marked the formal invasion of China by Japan. The victories enabled the Chinese Expeditionary Force to take Longling, a strategic town on the Yunnan-Burma Road, and join forces with the Chinese troops from India in northern Burma. In the summer of 1944, at nearly the same time the right wing of the Chinese Expeditionary Force was attacking Tangchong, the left wing, under the command of Song Shilian, laid siege to Longling. Longling was a strategically important town in western Yunnan where the Yunnan-Burma Road and the Tangchong-Longling Road intersected. Capturing it was crucial for the success of the Yunnan counteroffensive. 2 months earlier, after the 11th Group Army under the command of Song Shilian crossed the Nujiang River, a detachment of the army laid siege to Mount Songshan, while the main force advanced to attack Longling. At first, the attack on Longling went smoothly. It took only 3 or 4 days for the crack 87th and 88th Divisions to break through the Japanese defences and reach the outskirts of the town. On June the 10th, when the tide of the battle was shifting back and forth on the battlefields of Tangchong and Mount Songshan, the Chinese Expeditionary Force at Longling could already smell victory. Song Shilian set up his command post on the outskirts of Longling close to the front lines, and he personally directed the battle from there. 1 regiment of the 88th Division had already broken through the Japanese defences and entered the city. The Chinese troops were in high spirits and thought victory was within their grasp. However, an inexplicable event changed everything and brought a sudden reversal to the Chinese army's fortunes. On a rainy night in the middle of June 1944, Xiong Xinmin, the vice commander of the 88th Division, led his men in an attack on Liaodong, an important Japanese defensive position in the hills southeast of Longling. The fighting was fierce. Here is Xiong Xinmin's account of the events. I attacked Liaodong using 3 fresh regiments. The infantry and artillery troops that had been on the offensive for several days couldn't catch it. On my way back to the division command post at Jianshan Temple, I suddenly received the news that our troops had already taken Liaodong. I immediately returned to Liaodong and went up to the hilltop. I saw with my own eyes that the Japanese were retreating from the battlefield in disarray. Watching the Japanese suffer a crushing defeat made us all happy and proud. At that time, all our troops, even our radio operator, had poured down the hill to pursue the enemy. Just then, a courier came rushing up carrying spoils of war and told me that our army had already captured Longling. Shortly thereafter, another courier came to me and gave me the same news. I still didn't have phone contact with the front line. The news came to me from the rear. When phone contact was re-established, Army headquarters immediately called the division command centre at Jianshan Temple, and Song Xilian personally got on the phone to ask me if I could confirm that Longling had been taken. I answered that it was dark and raining hard, and I was at Laodong. I told him, however, that couriers had come from Longling and told me we had captured it, and that wherever they scouted in the city, they hadn't met with any resistance. They had also taken a considerable amount of booty. I still didn't have radio contact with Longling, but it seemed as if it had been taken. As the good news awaited confirmation from below, the first report of victory was transmitted to Chongqing. As soon as it was received, the press secretary for the Nationalist Government Military Commission announced news of the victory at Longling to the world. Newspapers throughout the part of China under nationalist control all published news of the victory of the Chinese Expeditionary Force, and then it quickly spread around the world. The Chinese Expeditionary Force wanted to win very badly, and the Chinese people badly needed the morale boost a victory would give them. After a brief silence, the Japanese announced that the Japanese army still controlled Longling. And it was true. Longling was still in Japanese hands. They were employing the empty city stratagem. Wang Dewu, a member of the General Staff of the 71st Army of the Chinese Expeditionary Force, has a vivid memory of this battle. Our regiment took out the Japanese supply depot. There was nothing in it but overcoats, boots, rice and canned food. Some soldiers thought that taking the supply depot meant we had taken the city, and they grabbed whatever they could to celebrate the victory. But unexpectedly, the Japanese counterattacked from the hills a short time later. We couldn't hold our position, and we were forced to retreat, with the loss of more than half our men. The Japanese counteroffensive was successful, and they recaptured Longling. The false report caused Chiang Kai-shek a grievous loss of face with the other Allied heads of state. 2 months later, Wang Jie was given command of the 11th Group Army, and Song Xilian was transferred to the rear for rehabilitation. The 11th Group Army's plan for capturing Longling was to approach it from 3 directions and surround it. The western gate to Longling was open and not defended. The goal was to force the Japanese army in Longling to retreat west, isolate and wipe out the Japanese troops defending Tangchong to the north and Mount Songshan to the east, and finally move eastward to outflank the Japanese. If this was accomplished, the Yunnan-Burma Road supply line could be reopened. However, in the eyes of the 56th Division of the Japanese Army in Ma Pingchuan to the west of Longling, if Longling were lost, all would be lost. Therefore, the Japanese Army had no alternative but to stay and fight to the bitter end. The Chinese Expeditionary Force's tactics of a lightning strike could not accomplish their intended result. In addition, mopping up the remnants of the Japanese Army in their heavily fortified bunkers in Longling had used up an enormous quantity of munitions, and the Chinese army couldn't get resupplied from the rear. This made it difficult to continue the attack. Beginning in the middle of June, a constant stream of small detachments of Japanese reinforcements arrived in Longling from the north and west. The battle for western Yunnan had entered a stalemate. The town of Longling and the surrounding counties still bear the scars of battles fought here 60 years ago. This is the most completely intact, reinforced concrete Japanese bunker in western Yunnan.
在我们龙陵县城建立了4个连一排的碉堡群，它是用钢筋混凝土来浇筑的，基本上每个碉堡控制范围都是在接近360度，互相支援、互相配合。同时在整个龙陵县城当时不足1平方公里的这个城区范围内，建立了比较密集的防御工事，还有交通壕，在龙陵城区四周的这个山上建立的这个大的交通壕，与城里面的交通壕都是连通的，有很多地方都是通过地下交通壕连通，所以应该说防御工事比较坚固。
The Japanese not only recognized the strategic importance of Longling, but also realized its fertile soil and perfect climate made it a perfect base for growing food to supply the army. When the Pacific War first broke out and the Yunnan-Burma Road was still open, an asphalt road ran from Wanting to Huitong Bridge. It was the only road for supplying the Chinese army and civilians with supplies from abroad. An endless stream of trucks of all imaginable kinds carried supplies along it, day and night. However, the road was so narrow that it couldn't transport all the supplies needed. Because of this problem, a method of shipping goods in stages was adopted. Goods were first collected in La Xiao in Burma and shipped first to Longling. In this way, the sleepy town of Longling was transformed into a busy transport hub. Longling fell to the Japanese in May 1942. In June of that year, Japanese Army Captain Toshitsugu Tajima set up a military administration in Longling and enslaved the local people under totalitarian rule. Toshitsugu Tajima was a Machiavellian schemer who was adept at using his social skills to reach his ends, and he had a very good understanding of conditions in China. His colleagues looked on him as a China hand.
他想到经营这一个地方呢，他就采取了一些比较特殊的方式。首先呢，先恢复学校，他也说得很好听，意思呢就是这个学生呢，必须要立志读书。 然后呢，在龙陵的百塔、龙山这地方呢，建起了一些日伪小学，删去了我们中国的这些爱国的这些东西，把日本的这些东西呢加进来，教日语，唱日语歌，唱会一个歌呢，他发给你一个糖，发给你一个糖，以示鼓励，给你看起来好像一片和平一样，所谓的什么大东亚共荣这样一种情况。
Tajima put considerable effort into restoring a semblance of normalcy because it was necessary to quickly restore business and trade to satisfy the Japanese army's supply needs.
因为当时这个经济呢，战争经济是衰败的，没有人去种田，是吧？经费来源呢，他也想了一些办法，就是鼓励老百姓呢去种大烟，然后呢收大烟税。 18岁，龙陵呢，民国年间就开始禁烟，它有一个成效的，就是老百姓至少知道种大烟是不对，不应该种大烟。但日本人来了以后，把这个东西翻转过来了，凡是他在的地方呢，都在种大烟。这个呢，就是从种植大烟呢，它来增加它的经费收入，减少它从日本对部队的攻击。 所以呢，整个日军在我们这个地方殖民的统治呢，它不仅是有经济的，它还有这个经济的、政治的、文化。